From the very first day I started this channel, I've expressed my view that Pixar has become too mature for children, and that their movies have simply become adult films in the guise of kids' entertainment. And I don't appear to be the only one who at least partially thinks this way either. As if you look at the reviews for Luca, you'll notice most of them say something to the effect of Pixar finally makes a movie for children. But the thing is, while this movie is certainly toned down in terms of maturity compared to some of their other more recent movies, it still isn't the ideal kids movie either. And today, I'd like to explain why that is. And I will be giving away major plot points in this video, so in case you haven't seen it yet but plan to, you should probably come back to this video another day. This is the only spoiler warning I'll be giving you. Okay, so to get right into it, I'd say the best way to describe the issue here is that Luca is less of a kid's movie and more of a coming-of-age story. And in case you're wondering what the difference is, I'd say that a kid's movie is supposed to be fun and inspire the imagination, while a coming-of-age movie is usually very stressful or angsty. In other words, the movie is about children, but it's not exactly a kid's movie. And to demonstrate my point here, let's take a look at the boys' ultimate goal. They want to buy a Vespa and ride around the world in it, having various adventures. Now in a kid's movie, the boys would probably get the Vespa very easily and go out on their journey, and maybe learn one or two valuable things along the way. In a coming-of-age story, the boys would become disillusioned with their dream and start to explore more grounded and adult interests. Now, which one of these two ends up happening in the end? And listen, I'm not saying it's a bad thing that the writers took this approach, but simply that they're putting the story ahead of the fun. And as Walt Disney himself said, fun should be the priority, especially when it comes to children. Though I'm also not saying that the movie should just be a bunch of non-sequitur gags either. As a writer myself, I'll gladly admit that the story is always very important. But in a kid's movie, the story has got to serve the fun first and foremost. And Luca doesn't do that. Instead, it's all about the story. And the result is that it's not all that fun when it really comes down to it, and has much more of the angst and stress associated with coming-of-age movies. And once again, I'm not saying that a movie shouldn't encourage children to embrace their passions over unrealistic dreams. Not at all. But there are ways to handle that more delicately than it is here. Because, as befitting a coming-of-age story, it's very realistic in its approach. And one thing that children's movies tend to thrive on is the unrealistic, or the imagination side of things. And not only does this help make the movie more fun, but it makes it easier to handle any morals the writers are trying to convey through this veil of fun and fantasy. And again, Luca doesn't do any of this, instead thriving on realism and Pixar's penchant for having the characters make bad decisions. Honestly, why did they have to put this scene in here? Especially because I have a very hard time believing, even when forced into a corner like that Luca would throw Alberto to the sharks like that. Pardon the expression. Though personally I do believe that's another problem. Their friendship just happens so suddenly. Out of nowhere, this kid just pulls another kid on land, and then suddenly they become inseparable? I mean, I know that montage is meant to show us that they become close over time, but I still think it would have made more sense if they'd at least known each other already. And I also know that a lot of people like to believe the two boys are gay, but from a strictly writing perspective and no other, I think it works better if they aren't. Particularly for the scene where Alberto reveals his father just left him. Because if he were gay and had feelings for Luca, that would be an easy way to explain why he becomes so jealous of Julia. But if he isn't gay, that tells you just how lonely and desperate for a friend he really is. Think about it. His father left him as an early teenager. He spent years alone, scaring sailors and collecting things for a hobby all by himself while hoping he might come back. The poor kid is craving some kind of companionship, and then he runs into Luca, who actually looks up to him and shows enthusiasm in the same things that he does. In other words, I think the reveal of his father's abandonment and just how lonely he actually is packs more of an emotional punch if he isn't gay, because that tells you his earlier actions are fueled solely by his crippling fear and depression of losing the one friend he actually has. Frankly, it evokes the fear in all of us of being left utterly alone and losing everybody. And, of course, the whole thing with his father makes it even more touching when Julia's father then goes looking for him even after Luca tells him he doesn't want to be found. Very angsty, yes, but still pretty touching. But once again, all of this just serves to prove how good of a coming-of-age movie this is, and not a children's movie, as those are all elements that work perfectly within that genre. And any attempt to make it more for children doesn't really work. And on that front, I feel there's no better example I can give than the villain. A man so unmemorable and bland, I literally had to look up his name. He may just be one of the, least best villains in Pixar history. Now don't get me wrong, he does most certainly fill his role of being a huge jerk and a threat to the sea monsters, but you mean to tell me this was the best they could do? I mean, I know that unlike Disney, Pixar isn't exactly known for their villains, but when they do it right, they do it perfectly. And the thing is, this guy doesn't even have the charisma of their less memorable ones like Chick Hicks, who in many ways he's very similar to, because at least he's a scumbag that's pretty fun to watch, especially when he gets a very appropriate defeat when all's said and done. This guy isn't charismatic or downright hateable. He's just a common self-obsessed jerk. And frankly, his defeat is rather pitiful when compared to Pixar's best. I mean, I'm not saying that they should have set him on fire or anything like that, just that more could have been done with him. Because here's the thing. In most kids' movies, the villain is one of those all-out evil beings that everybody hates and is pretty much the driving force behind everything that happens. And I don't think I should even have to tell you that. But in Luca, Urkel does neither of those things. Again, he's just a jerk that's easily intimidated by those more powerful than him, and the conflict is caused elsewhere, as befitting Pixar's more mature style of storytelling. In other words, he's really only there to be a nuisance, raise the stakes at the climax, and pretty much just because this is at least supposed to be a kid's movie, so there has to be a villain of some kind. But again, through him and the other things I've mentioned, I don't even know if Pixar is even capable of making a true kids movie anymore. Now listen, I liked Luca. I enjoyed watching it. But at the same time, when looking at this from an objective standpoint, I just can't help but note that Pixar created a coming of age story instead of the kids' movie they may or may not have set out to make. And as I've already said before, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, only that it simply proves my point that they aren't really making their movies for kids anymore. Because even when it's their actual goal to do so, they just can't help but make it somewhat mature and grounded. They just can't get it right. And as I just noted, I don't think that makes it a bad movie. Just one that maybe isn't as much for kids as the critics, and even audience, would honestly have you believe it is. Okay, that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Luca is more a coming of age story than a kids movie? Or do you believe that it's the perfect example of a children's film and that I'm dead wrong about everything I said? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And remember, you don't have to agree with anything I said on this if you don't want to. You are just as entitled to your opinion as I am or anybody else. And thank you all for watching. It is very greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.